Hey guys, so today should be Thursday, and we're going to continue and finish up our PowerPoint on Native culture based on our reading about the Algonquins and the Iroquois. Remember yesterday we did go over the bell ringer very briefly. You guys did a good job in the comments section. Feel free to answer. I usually almost always respond to your bell ringer, so you can answer back. I usually ask you a question to go into more detail, so I'd love you to answer back, or you could ignore me. It's a little rude, but it'd be awesome if you just answered. We looked at the objectives, what we're going to do, key terms. We talked a little bit about the homes. One thing I did want to add that Algonquins, although they are in wigwams and teepees, we looked at the homes like this. Algonquins did always leave their teepees and their wigwams for the winter time to go in a slightly smaller version of a logging house. You might have a dozen people in it versus like a dozen families. So in the winter time, they would go into something big and more formal than the single wigwam for a single family. So I just did want to add that. All right, where else? Roles in clothing. We talked about this. Men's roles, women's roles, pretty standard. Kids, pretty standard in their clothing. As you guys know, this is more so what they would look like, and mostly made out of deer skin. Every once in a while we get to other things, beaver, bear, and so on. But covered that, and I did just talk about different portrayals, and even just pop culture and how much this shapes us and has shaped us. Sometimes it's not a big deal. It's just, all right, whatever, you're misinformed. But sometimes when you get this whole let's say umbrella type view on like a certain group, whatever you're from Schmoke, and so you're one of those football players, so you're one of the, what I mean, like it can be dangerous, it can't just be ill-informed, but sometimes it can mean genocide. So just something to watch out for. So I think it's always important to be technical. I know we make mistakes, I make mistakes, but I do think it's proper and good and healthy for us to just be technical with things and be specific with things. I think oversimplifications are dangerous. Anyway, let's talk about trade. So natives had no money system as we think of it, but what they did do was trade and barter. That means kind of like trading goods and services. Maybe you give me your cell phone and I give you my cell phone. Let's say you have an Android for an iPhone or vice versa. Or it could mean that maybe you even give me money and then I do a service for you, like maybe put on a roof or something. That could kind of be looked at as bartering. I guess a better example of that might be like babysitting. Like, you do something for me, I do something for you, and maybe it involves cash, maybe not. So they didn't really have currency. People think that they used wampum as currency, but they didn't. Wampum was more so music, not like currency sort of in that way, but this is like later after Europeans are here. Basically, it's just decorative shell that very carefully with tools that they make into these little beads. It's very hard, very difficult, very time consuming. And they make belts out of them too for various things. One of the things that they do is record history with it. For instance, this could be looked at with William Penn and natives coming together. They call him Brother Penn. But it could be used for other things. It could be for peace treaties, and I'm going to show you some pictures for it. But they are decorative, and sometimes even just having the colors or stripes on it, depending on how many, like that means a lot. You have purple, it could mean like wisdom or wealth or royalty. You have black that could symbolize, like war, death, or disease, grief. For instance, if you see some natives and maybe they have certain belts, maybe it means certain things. Maybe it's a warning, maybe it's not. Maybe it has to do with peace or something. But all these different things, whether it's colors or symbols or even like stripes, like they do mean something. They're used as gifts to each other or to the Europeans. They're used as peace agreements. They do tell history, and they can even send a message or even a warning, depending. Last, they are used also in ceremonies and sometimes spiritually, so that's worth mentioning. I'm going to show you a couple images of bartering, just a quick illustration. I believe this is fur, so it's not actually wampum belt, but they would constantly be trading partners with the British and the French and the Dutch and the Swedes and so on. Natives were constantly working partners with different groups. Here's another quick example. We have cash, we have credit, and then you barter, you can trade. And we actually have a ton of different websites for this. Some of them are just like trade.com or tradeyourgoods.com. You can just quick search and you can actually trade your own goods for other people's goods, or do a service for their service and so on. Another good example, more popular one, is like Airbnb. You can obviously you can pay for it, but you're basically using somebody's house. That's one of the quick examples of bartering today. And you can even go on Investopedia, and it looks at modern bartering and how it's broken down into microeconomics. So I think that's cool if you're interested more in bartering. Now, here's one example of a breakdown of a wampum belt. Just look at why they have this many. They have 5. Later, they'd have 6 with Tuscarora. Remember, this is the Iroquois Confederacy, and they were trying to get number 7, or trying to get Ben Franklin in the U.S., but we never really bit with it. But these things do mean certain things. So here's that shown again right here, if you can notice. Here are the Iroquois tribes. Here, this is 50 different wampum, I guess you say strings, belts, whatever you want to call it, 50 different strands. So those of you that paid attention, that would represent like the Grand Council, if you remember. Here's 6. I'll move it a little bit so you can see it. This would be, all these 5, but plus Tuscarora. This would be like an alliance belt. This would show the Great Peace Treaty with, let's say, Washington and the U.S. This would show, and this shows like everybody in alliance holding hands. And this shows like William Penn and the Lenape. So they do tell history. They do a lot of cool things. Now let's look at transportation. Natives did travel most of the time on land, and mostly on trails, like super elaborate trails. And they'd have all different trails. Maybe there was like a war trail, maybe there was a trade trail. They had some stops along these trails that they might even have bear meat, like even cooked, like ready for the next person to eat. They weren't always, I guess you could say, war trails, or how do I want to put it? They weren't always exclusive to just their tribe. Sometimes they would share with other people, which is interesting. When they did travel by water, they'd mostly use canoes. Algonquins would use like a superior lightweight birch bark canoe, while the Iroquois, they would have like a heavier elm bark canoe. And typically for the Iroquois, these didn't last that long. They didn't hold up the same. But as I said before, most of the traveling was done on land, and mostly on these trails. By the time Europeans are even getting there, there's so many complex and elaborate trails, and even secret trails. The natives were excellent at this, and they made the routes carefully, very carefully. Just a quick example of that is like, let's say you have a tribe or a clan make a warpath, and they would do it strategically to give themselves higher ground. Maybe there's a lot of brush so they can hide from enemies. And again, it's just, common sense of anybody that knows anything about war. I guess the stereotypes of war, that, the higher ground is helpful. So they were planned very carefully. And a lot of our own trails and even some of our highways roughly follow these lines, and that's not by accident. Now, one last thing that your book does mention about it, if natives were lost, let's say in the woods, because you have to remember Pennsylvania at the time is 98% forest. If lost, check the moss was the saying, right? Moss was located on the northern side of the trees. So it was just a little thing that your book mentions. I think it's a question in your reading, but I don't think I ask you on anything, but definitely is interesting. When lost, check the moss. It's on the northern side of the trees. Now here's a quick representation of the Great Shamokin Path that would basically, I don't know if you can see it great, but it basically run from like Lock Haven area all the way into like Shamokin, as in Shamokin Dam, like Sunbury area. So we can see that here. Remember that is where the Susquehanna meets the different branches, so in Sunbury area. And if you even take a look at the native paths, look, Indian trails and colonial period, you'll see a lot of overlap with some of the paths. As in like from Scranton, if you look at some of the ones that are more horizontal. And it kind of works out that way, that they kind of pick the best land, the more flat land, the ones, they would build these trails that like made sense in areas. So, if it's not broken, don't fix it, and we'll mimic that for our own trails, for our own roads, and so on. Alrighty, we're almost done. Let's look at their religion. So the natives tend to worship nature, sort of. They believed in a great spirit, and both of them did, but they also both believed in many spirits or lesser spirits. So this is tough to say that they're different, because there's a lot of overlap for both of them. Now, they would call it the Great Spirit for Algonquins. If I have it one way or the other on the test, don't worry about it. I'll probably just throw the question out because the more and more I research, the more and more I find that their alignment religiously is very, very, very close. Now, some of the interesting things that you'll find in the Iroquois or the Algonquins with the Great Spirit, it's a universal spirit. It's everywhere. It's in everything. It's not just in you or people or animals. It's also in the moon. It's in the water. It's in everything. Some of their shaman or their spiritual people, their mediums between worlds, because they did think there was like an afterlife. Um, they would say that, the Great Spirit would tell us, love one another, fear God, I love you, and you created or that the Great Spirit says to the people, I love you, and I've created this land for you to live on. Do, quote unquote, if we all do good to each other and our brothers, we will all share the afterlife in God's house. Does any of this sound familiar? Yeah. Sounds like a lot of different stories that we get, whether it's Christian or other religions close, like the Abrahamic religions. These are all messages we've heard before, so it is interesting to think about. Their afterlife could mean like a version of hell, or it could also mean like heaven. And what they think they do is when they die, they're still like a person and they're still chasing animal spirits, hunting and fishing animal spirits. That's kind of goes to show you how much they respect nature. They did treat dead animals and even like dead fish with respect. They always thought if they didn't, then they would be angry and something bad would happen, a harvest, death, whatever, a plague. Even fish bones were thrown back into the water, and sometimes skulls. I don't think there's any in this picture, but skulls would be used maybe as decorative, but it's not out of disrespect. It's not like, haha, I did this. It is like in admiration. Now, like I said before, there's lesser spirits, there's good spirits, there's bad spirits. They thought the Great Spirit was a good one, but they did think of a few evil spirits. I'm going to show you one that's kind of well known, but in general, they would have different ceremonies, maybe 6 a year, depending on their tribe. Iroquois tended to have 6 per year. But eventually the Iroquois, a lot of them actually convert to Christianity. And I think that's the point. Some Algonquin, like the Conestoga, they were Christians. Moravians, I believe, were Christians. And those were not Iroquois. So anyway, let's keep moving on. What do I have here? All right, the Great Spirit, in a lot of different traditions, he's actually a large rabbit that would create everything, but not always. Sometimes the Great Spirit is just personified as this person, but it's actually, if you look at the picture, kind of like everything. So to say what the Great Spirit is, kind of like Christians, kind of like Jews, kind of like, even like Muslims, maybe even like Buddhists and Hindus, it's kind of like everything. So it's hard to pinpoint it or put a picture on it. To go on, the evil spirits, it's a lot easier to kind of give a picture of this, the Wendigo. This is actually in Pet Cemetery. It's a thing like around the cemetery, if you read the book, that's bringing all these animals back to life on an Indian or native reservation. And natives have a bunch of other like bad spirits and evil spirits. The Wendigo's supposedly like this cannibal person spirit that's possessed, and it's really bad and it'll kill you, and maybe you become one as well. If you think about it, you could become one, and the only way to stop it is to basically kill them and burn their body alive to release them. So there are a bunch of other ones if you're interested. There's even a Netflix movie. It's not exclusively on the Wendigo, but it is kind of on folklore. It's on the forest and the constant cross-cultural timeless archetype. You like those words, right? I was looking at a thesaurus on just like the fear of the unknown, the fear of the woods, and the fear of these gods or whatever they are living in there. So it is super interesting, but I think you probably have to be 17 to watch it. There's some violence, but it is another creepy, very similar to the Wendigo. But I could definitely say more, but I wanted to keep this short. Please answer the view questions in comments. Describe what the native villages and homes were like. So tell me what we went over. Explain how natives lived, traveled, and worshiped. Again, tell me what we went over in comments. And then how have natives contributed to modern society? There's something in there. I'm not going to tell you what. I'm not going to tell you what, but you can think of some of the things that they gave to our culture. Okay, so let me know what you think in comments. Thanks for watching as always. We'll get back into it tomorrow. Have a good one, guys. Bye.